So I was playing through my daily mix when I came across this song. I thought, what a cool glitchy sound. Must be some new Animal Collective inspired band I haven't heard of yet, with this Banksy style artwork and these retro vocals. Then to my surprise, I saw the record was from 1968. What the f***? So this experimental pop record, which I assumed was made by some hipsters with SP404s, was actually made over 50 years ago on God knows what analog equipment. The band was called Silver Apples, and on top of being way ahead of their time, they had a wild 3-year run that involved gigs with MC5 and T-Rex, playing at the Moon Landing Watch Party in Central Park, and ultimately getting screwed out of the music industry because of an album cover that crossed the line. So this is the story of a band who invented electronic and experimental pop music, and then almost became forgotten until 30 years later. The story begins with SIMEON, COXE, and Danny Taylor, two young counterculture musicians in Manhattan who were playing in a blues rock band. One day, SIMEON brought a World War II oscillator to a gig and began making these crazy sounds over their music. What did his bandmates think of it?
Well, they hated it. They thought it was awful, but I loved it. And so did Danny Taylor, who was the drummer. He loved it. And so did the manager of the club. He said, we were going to fire you guys, but do more of that stuff.
The rest of the band members quit, but SIMEON and Danny decided to continue under a new name, Silver Apples. SIMEON would add 8 more oscillators, as well as filters, fuzz units, an echo, a wah-wah, and anything else he could find. The gargantuan machine was nicknamed The Thing by SIMEON, but everyone else just called it the SIMEON, like it was some extension of him. Danny Taylor adjusted his drumming to match the repetitive, droning nature of the oscillators. As SIMEON described it, he decided to explore the whole idea of drumming in patterns, not beats. Amazingly, the band's first gig as a two-piece would be in front of 30,000 people in Central Park. The band had to start setting up early in the morning to make sure they'd be ready by the 3 p.m. start time, and prayed all the equipment would function under the unique circumstances. Luckily, everything worked, and the crowd was attentively curious.
Because it was such an unusual sound, the reaction from the audiences at first was this almost self-defense. It took maybe 10 minutes, and they would begin to get it. And the next thing you know, it's a party.
To be clear, Silver Apples weren't the first musicians to use oscillators or signal processing. After World War II, electroacoustic musicians began manipulating and splicing tape to create vast compositions, like Hugh Caine's Dripsody from 1955. Around the same time, Stockhausen was making purely synthesized music, and John Cage was playing with radio static and modified pianos on national TV. But all of these musicians considered their work classical, for an audience of academics and theater-goers, a far cry from the smoky Manhattan pubs that Silver Apples, and rock fans in general, would habitate. On the West Coast, there was a rock band doing a somewhat similar thing. Called the United States of America, the band featured a dedicated electronics player, Joseph Bird. However, their songs tended to be more traditional psychedelic rock, with electronic sounds added over the top. Still pretty awesome nonetheless. But back to the Silver Apples. Word about them spread quickly through the underground music scene, and they'd soon get a record deal from a local indie label, Cap Records. However, the label's in-house producer was so terrified of the SIMEON and the sounds it made that Silver Apples had to engineer their first record themselves, resulting in a sometimes lo-fi but surprisingly strong record. The album, self-titled Silver Apples, was released to high acclaim from rock music's freakier fan base. They played shows with bands like Jethro Tull, MC5, and T-Rex, and attracted fans like Andy Warhol, John Lennon, and, for some reason, New York City's then-mayor, John Lindsay. Perhaps it was the fact that Silver Apples could gather swarms of hippies away from the streets and into city parks whenever they played a free concert, or perhaps he genuinely liked their avant-garde sound. But either way, he once dubbed them the Sound of New York and commissioned them to write a song for the Apollo 11 moon landing, which they later performed during a watch party in Central Park. Over 10,000 people gathered and braved a downpour to watch Neil Armstrong take his first steps, then hear Silver Apples usher in the future. As SIMEON described, there was this tingling, sexy, frightening, scary thing coursing through my body. I was singing my heart out and Armstrong was stepping onto the moon. Human beings were entering a new era and thousands of people were crying with happiness, soaking wet, and singing and hugging each other. And if that doesn't sound crazy enough, Silver Apples had another VIP connection in Jimi Hendrix. The band members met Jimi in 1966 when he was a struggling blues guitarist in the Blue Flames. 3 years later, they were recording in the same studio, with Jimi's time slot coming right after the Silver Apples. On occasion, they would jam together during the overlap.
We were doing a show on the 4th of July, and we wanted to do our version, an electronic version of the Star Spangled Banner. About 4 in the morning, in walks Jimi Hendrix. He said, I'm doing the same damn thing. Let me show you what I'm doing. And so he started playing some of his stuff. And I set together my bass oscillator so that I was tuned with him. Fortunately, the guy in the booth had the sense to roll tapes. Later on, Jimi came and added 1 or maybe 2 more guitar tracks to it.
All of this begs the question, what happened? Why did a band with so much intrigue and star endorsement become almost unknown today? First, to get the obvious reasons out of the way, the sound is very out there and not always super pleasant. It's obvious they were never going to grace the AM airwaves. However, freakier bands than the Silver Apples came out of the 60s with long careers, and New York City was an exceptionally fertile place for experimental pop music through the 70s and 80s. So why did this band suddenly disappear? The beginning of the end came with their second record, Contact. For the album cover, their agency struck a deal with Pan Am, allowing the band to photograph themselves inside the cockpit of an airplane in exchange for a visible Pan Am logo on the cover. What Pan Am didn't realize is that the back of the record would show the wreckage of an actual plane crash.
Well, you can imagine what the executives at Pan Am went through when they saw that.
The result was a lawsuit that pulled the record off the shelves and prevented the band from playing live because it was classified as promoting the record.
We had to go into hiding because they had city marshals come in to try and confiscate our equipment in lieu of some kind of payment or something. And so Danny and I just went into hiding, just kind of like disappeared.
And that was pretty much the end of the band after that?
Yeah. We went and disappeared as much into the woodwork as you can.
SIMEON gave up on music altogether and moved to Alabama where he worked odd jobs and took up sailing as his new life passion. As he told The Guardian, I thought if I can't be a Silver Apple, then I don't want to play music. I pretty much forgot about it. I figured it was a failed experiment that would never be resurrected. And he may have been right. However, the same year Silver Apples called it quits in 1970, another duo emerged. Having seen the Apples play around the city, they were inspired to also use electronic instruments to make glitchy pop music. They called themselves Suicide, and they became one of the most influential bands of the emerging New York punk scene.
He's looking so cute.
For the next 2 decades, the Silver Apples' discography was kept alive by bootlegs and spread word of mouth by music nerds and hipsters. In the 90s, bands like Portishead, Spiritualized, and Stereolab would cite Silver Apples as an influence. All of this newfound attention inspired SIMEON to revive the project in 1996, which he's been doing ever since. Denny Taylor passed away in 2005, and rather than perform with a new drummer, SIMEON decided to sample all of his drum parts. If you want to check out more videos about unique genres of music and interesting band stories, be sure to check out this channel and subscribe.